Hi guys! Today we will be looking at 7 motorcycle myths which a lot of beginner riders believe. Those myths sometimes can sound convincing, but in reality they are false and incredibly dangerous, which is why it is important to not fall for them. Let's start with a timeless classic. If you are about to crash on a motorcycle, you have to dump it and let it slide. This is a pretty well-known myth, and lots of people even openly mock it with memes about "had to lay her down", which is a humorously distorted phrase "I had to lay her down", something people who crash their bikes say often to make it seem to other people like they have crashed it on purpose and not due to lack of riding skill. Though this myth is as old as hills, lots of people still believe in it and spread it around. Like, for example, this amigo, which has more than 6 million subscribers on YouTube.
But if you're going at higher speeds and you can see there's a wreck ahead and you cannot avoid it, this may sound crazy, but you want to dump your bike. Then as it skids, you jump on top of the bike and ride it like a surfboard.
Boy, I sure am glad that YouTube heavily promotes knowledgeable people who are not spreading dangerous misinformation, eh? On a serious note though, why dumping the bike is a stupid move? Because subconsciously it even might seem like a great idea. Our bike is about to crash and we can just jump off it, avoiding all trouble, sort of like ejecting out of a fighter jet. In reality, the problem is that we have the first law of Newton. An object in motion stays in motion unless acted on by force. By jumping off our bike, we will become this loose object, which now uncontrollably slides forward alongside the abandoned bike. So by dumping the bike, we literally gain nothing, except maybe a free tattoo removal. During an emergency road situation, we will stop much faster by using the brakes efficiently. This way, for stopping, we are using the friction between the pavement and our tires, which is much higher than the friction between pavement and our clothes. And even aside from all this, if dumping the bike is such an alpha move, how come that nobody practices it? Imagine your MSF instructor tells you this: "Alright guys, now please all line up here and one by one accelerate to 25 miles per hour, and when you cross that line, jump off the bike and let it slide." Of course it never happens, because it's stupid. People who layer down just don't know how to brake properly and are trying to save their faces by telling us that they crashed on purpose. Since we already started to talk about braking, let's move on to the second myth for today. Motorcycles brake much worse than cars. Usually people think that since motorcycles have only 2 wheels, which are also significantly smaller than car wheels, that means bikes have much smaller contact patches and therefore have much less grip, which is why they brake and stop far worse than cars. Seems reasonable. But tire grip doesn't work this way. The size of a contact patch does not affect the level of grip directly. Let's say we have 2 vehicles. The first one has a pretty large tire contact patch, the second one has a small contact patch. Now, let's say both of those vehicles are braking at the same time. We can divide each contact patch into many tiny bits. Each of those tiny bits are contributing a little share of friction force. And when we summarize all of them, we will end up with total friction force from the whole contact patch. The larger contact patch obviously has more of those tiny bits, so it would seem that their combined force would be greater. But we know the friction force in each of those tiny bits of a contact patch depends on normal force, which basically is the weight with which this tiny bit of rubber is being pressed into the pavement. Since the mass of a vehicle is being spread over the contact patch, yes, in the smaller one we have less of those individual bits of rubber, but each of them is being pressed into the pavement more, so each of those bits creates more friction. So if we summarize everything, we will end up with the same amount of friction force in both contact patches and find out that their size doesn't directly affect our stopping force. We shouldn't think that the size of a contact patch doesn't matter at all. For example, in a small contact patch, because each of those individual rubber bits gets squashed and stressed much more, we have far less mileage out of a tire. A car tire lasting 50,000 miles is not too uncommon. Good luck riding 50,000 miles on a motorcycle tire. Or during high-stress scenarios like racing, when a tire constantly is under great load, a small contact patch will potentially overheat faster and have far less thermal stability than a bigger one. This is a part of the reason why on racing bikes we typically have pretty wide, big tires. With all that being said, motorcycles on average brake about the same as cars. Of course, it depends on a particular car and a particular bike. Some 1980s Harley will obviously brake worse than new Porsche 911, just like some old Ford Escort will brake worse than new Panigale. On average, bikes can stop about the same as cars. It's important to bear in mind, though, that braking on a bike is more difficult than a car. A car has an advantage of a static balance, so even without ABS, the worst can happen if we brake too much, we'll have a skid. On a bike, even with ABS, if we make a stupid enough mistake, we will crash. So it's important to learn how to brake properly. But it has to do with us, riders, not motorcycles themselves. I have a sneaky suspicion the whole reason for this myth in the first place is that people who didn't know how to brake were blaming their failures on their bikes. And speaking of people who don't know how to brake, here is our next myth. Rear brake is your main brake. This myth was born in long-forgotten dark ages of humanity, when ancient motorcycle riders were riding their prehistoric non-ABS bikes with petrified tires on often unpaved rural roads. The slightest excessive force on the front brake could have easily locked up the front wheel, and the rider, often equipped with nothing more than a pair of jeans and red bandana, had to lay it down. Because of all this, a lot of riders were frightened to death to even touch the front brake and were constantly using only the rear one. Nowadays, with modern tires on pavement, even without ABS, we have to really lean onto that front brake to lock up the front wheel. Most bikes will do a stoppie long before skidding the front tire. And because of the weight transfer to the front under braking, our front brake has far more stopping power than the rear one. If we brake with only the rear brake, our stopping distance will be 2 to 3 times longer than if we were using the front brake instead. Back in the day, it was not a huge problem, since there was not so much traffic on the road and it was pretty slow in comparison to what we have now. Now, especially in crowded cities, we have all sorts of hazards: cars turning suddenly in front of us, clueless jaywalkers, or just random objects emerging from under cars in front of us. So we just have to become proficient with brakes, and with the front brake especially, since it has the most stopping power. We can't rely on the rear brake alone. And one more really popular myth about braking is that you can never, ever, under any circumstances brake in a corner. Whatever you do, don't brake in a corner, or you will going to crash immediately. Just like the previous myth, this also is being spread by people who simply don't want to learn how to brake on motorcycle properly. The main problem with braking in a curve is that motorcycles, unlike cars, don't have static balance. Motorcycles rely on the front-end self-steering effect to keep them upright, and in order for this effect to take place, the wheels must be rolling. If the front wheel locks up and starts to skid, the bike almost immediately loses its balance and falls down. If we lock up and skid the rear tire, we will also either low side, or if at some point the rear tire regains traction and grabs the pavement, we high side. Either way, skidding one of the tires during a corner almost automatically ends up in a crash and a following head-to-layer-down speech. Because of all this, lots of riders are afraid to use their brakes in a corner. And sure, if we just yank the brake suddenly in the middle of a corner, we will drop the bike for sure. But if we use the brakes in a smooth, controlled manner, we can actually brake pretty fast and even stop mid-corner. This requires a bit of practice. For example, in our King of the Road course, we spent 2 weeks working on our mid-corner braking skills. But it is not a rocket science either. Once we learn how our bike reacts on the front, rear and combined braking mid-corner and develop the necessary muscle memory, we can definitely brake mid-corner and quite intensively too. Now, before we move on, I'd like to mention our sponsor, Ultramax Cell, the company which makes high-tech base layers, which are perfectly suited for motorcycle riders. What makes Ultramax Cell thermal wear so good? It's all about the material, an advanced 3D structured polypropylene fiber. This design provides a compression effect that ensures the fabric to fit snugly, making it work on the whole surface of our body. And more importantly, the 3D honeycomb structure increases the material's surface area, allowing it to efficiently wick moisture away and evaporate it quickly. When we are riding in hot weather, with ventilated gear on top, 3D structure enhances the evaporative cooling effect. In colder conditions, the honeycomb traps more air around our body, keeping us warmer. Ultramax Cell is a very nice improvement to regular thermal clothing. I can highly recommend giving it a try. I'll drop an Amazon link in the description to this video along with their direct contact info. Depending on your location where you live, you might get a better deal by reaching out to them directly due to varying shipping options. Alright, commercial break is over, time to move on to the next myth in our list. It's about riding in the rain. Lots of people think that the wet pavement is extremely slippery and we can't ride normally. Some new riders are even scared to ride in the rain at all. But even if we generally don't ride in the rain, at some point we will encounter some in the middle of our journey, so we should be prepared. Luckily, wet pavement is not really that slippery. Although we definitely have less traction than normally, we still can brake quite fast and corner rather effectively. If we know what we are doing, of course, which is why I have a separate video about riding in rainy conditions. Give it a look if you haven't already. During rain, the wet pavement itself is probably one of the lesser of our concerns. We typically should worry much more about low visibility and surface hazards, like painted lines, rails, standing water, etc. Those are actually pretty slippery surfaces, not the wet pavement. But despite all those, once we learn where to look, what to expect and how the bike behaves with less traction available, riding in wet conditions is not that bad as it seems. Next myth many new riders fall for is that we have to buy a really powerful and fast bike for safety reasons. Supposedly, we absolutely must have a 100+ horsepower motorcycle in order to be safe on the road, to keep up with the traffic, to accelerate out of situations.
And if you see a problem occurring behind you, speed up and get out of the way.
In real life, however, the traffic usually consists of cars and trucks, and the vast majority of them are pretty low-powered and slow vehicles. Even really underpowered 200cc motorcycles with around 25 horsepower can keep up with the typical highway traffic. Sure, they can barely keep up, but still they manage. And any bike with about 50 horses will easily be faster than 95% of traffic around you. As far as accelerate out of a situation goes, the main question is, what is this situation? The only typical scenario that comes to my mind is avoiding being rear-ended when we stop. But this one doesn't require a powerful engine. We don't need to accelerate to fast speed, we just have to quickly maneuver out of the way. With all typical road crash scenarios, we can easily find dozens of examples here on YouTube. For example, we can quite easily find 10 examples of cars turning left in front of a bike, or 10 examples of high sides mid-corner, or low sides mid-corner, or when a rider brakes too hard and does a nosedive, or when he snatches the brake and slides the front tire. My point is that usually there are lots of examples of typical road situations, which is why they are called typical. They happen all the time. But I doubt that we can find 10 videos where the rider crashed because he had less than 100 horsepower motorcycle. There are plenty of videos where a rider crashed because he couldn't control the power of his bike though. For normal riding on public roads, about 40-50 horses are easily enough, and even with less, we still can manage. And just to be clear, I don't say that nobody shouldn't ride powerful motorcycles, only that there is no need for it for safety reasons. And the last myth for today is not so much about motorcycles, but about the riding gear. Riding gear doesn't really help much in a crash. Therefore, we can skip it and ride in shorts and t-shirt.
I can't tell you to take the armor out of your jacket. I can just tell you that I take the armor out of my jacket, and I love it.
Boy, I sure am glad. At first glance, it kind of makes sense. After all, if we go head-on into a truck at a high speed, we're screwed either way, in full gear or not. However, statistically, only 1 out of every 1,000 accidents occurs at speeds higher than 85 miles per hour, and the average speed of impact for motorcycle accidents is 21.5 miles per hour. At this speed, suddenly all of our gear makes much more sense, and in lots of cases we can either walk away completely unharmed or with far less severe injuries. More so, even if we put all the crashing possibilities aside, on the bike we still have other hazards to worry about. In particular, there are lots of loose objects on the road: stones, bricks, pieces of rubber from exploded truck tires, some leftover debris from car accidents, etc. Car tires can pick up all this stuff and chuck it at us with high velocity, enough to crack smaller bones and joints in our body, like knuckles, for example. Which is exactly the reason why we have our gloves plated like this, and why we have face shields on our helmets, and also why our whole body should ideally be covered with at least some form of protective clothing. And I'm not even talking about constant wind blast and sunburns. After all, El Hombre de Verdad wears his skin cancer with pride. So here we go. 7 common motorcycle myths lots of beginner riders believe. As usual, if you are interested in learning more advanced riding techniques and becoming a better rider, subscribe to the channel, join our King of the Road Advanced course, and turn into an excellent rider by doing over 40 specially designed exercises in a span of 9 weeks. Or you can check out our beginner rider and training routine courses, if you prefer to practice on your own. Ride safely and have a wonderful day. Bye!